Do that. Shred. Lunar Blessing. Nice, dude. Nice, dude. Beautiful. Yo guys, what is up? Max on our Path of Exile 2 video, and today we're updating my crit Oracle Druid wolf form build. We posted the basically Act 1 and 2 version of this build just to give you an idea of where to get started and how to get off the ground. I've now beaten the campaign, the interludes, and we're into maps. And before we get too crazy with maps and starting to get really geared up and juiced up, I wanted to take kind of a snapshot of our character to show you what we're working with, and also go over some of the things that I learned and discovered about scaling this build and getting it through the campaign, some pros and some cons. Hope you guys enjoyed the breakdown. Let's get right into it. So some quick pros and cons after playing this build through the campaign. The first pro is you get to play a wolf. You're speedy. I think it feels really, really good. All of the attacks are very snappy. Shred kind of teleports you to enemies. And the biggest pro so far from what I've been playing is that you just have a lot of burst DPS. Most of the bosses in the campaign you can kill with either 1 or 2 rotations of your abilities. We're going to be going over that rotation because it is actually quite important. This is a, PoE 2, they wanted to do combos. You're very combo focused, and the order that you use your skills and how you use them is actually pretty important. So we'll be going over that. Some cons of the build: you have to play melee. So, until we get some more AoE and some more quality of life, your clear isn't going to kick up until a little bit later on. Then also you do need to kind of dodge enemies or sometimes damage. We are going to be speccing more into survivability the later that we get into the game. I started to pick up some bigger nodes, but if you're struggling with survivability or things like that, make sure you're trying to find high reses on your gear, life, and energy shield and armor. And there's also other things that you can do to increase your survivability, which we'll be talking about. But those are kind of some pros and cons. And now let's get into the skills and stuff. So let's start by going over our gem sockets. So to start, we're using Shred. This is our main boss damage, not necessarily because of the damage hits of Shred, which are good, but more so because of the explosions of the ice fragments that they cause. These ice fragments do count as projectiles, which means there's some pretty funny things that we're going to be able to do with it later. For example, we messed around with Fork during the campaign, which when you hit an enemy with a projectile, it forks and creates a duplicate, and we were just duplicating these projectiles and sending them everywhere. Didn't really help with bossing because it would just send all the projectiles going everywhere, but for map clear, it could be really cool. Definitely something I plan to incorporate once we get some more sockets on this. By the way, you get sockets on Shred just by leveling it up, or just by you leveling. I believe you get the 4th socket around level 65, and the 3rd socket around level 36. I could be wrong about that. But you do level this up or get more supports by increasing your level. For supports on it, we're using rapid attacks, elemental armament, and close combat. All things that increase pretty much the damage of Shred, but also the projectiles that are going to be spawning from it. Next, after you get your spirit up, you're going to want to go for Herald Device first, in my opinion, then Savage Fury. Savage Fury is a massive damage buff. I mainly use this against elites and bosses. Basically, whenever you're attacking, you're going to build up Fury. When you have your maximum amount of Fury, you can click this button. You get a bunch more attack speed and more damage. It will drain your life, but it's not really super noticeable. If you are on 1 HP, you wouldn't want to click this, but just hit a health potion and you'll be fine. Really, really nice skill. So once you get both of those, then we can get our wolf pack. Believe that the the wolves that are spawning from Predator's Mark are currently bugged to not deal any damage, so we've changed the way that we're working around those. We are using Wolfpack with Loyalty, which means 10% of their damage from hits is taken from our supported companion's life before us, and our companions have 30% less max life. Once again, if I didn't make this clear, the way that I'm planning on playing this build, and my goal for it, is to use the wolves as kind of support to give us utility. Enemies focus them, so inherently they are more survivability, and enemies like them getting hit and taking hit damage for us is more survivability. I also plan to put on Meat Shield support. I don't have it yet, but Meat Shield support will make them take 40% less damage and do less damage. I don't really care about how much damage they're dealing. I just want them to keep us alive and take damage for us. So once you get enough spirit, we grab that. Then Lunar Assault. This is one of your main clear skills, just because it instantly freezes enemies, so it's great for setting off Herald explosions. We're using Ice Bite so that it gains extra damage as cold for 5 seconds on freezing an enemy. Then Deep Freeze for more freeze duration. This is a lot of the times our setup on rares and sometimes even bosses, so it freezing for longer allows us to do more damage with our Shred. Elemental Armament for more elemental damage attack. And then I picked Super Critical for 100% increased crit damage bonus with 20% less crit chance. Once again, on Oracle, all of our attacks are guaranteed crits. They roll until they crit, and every time they roll, they reduce our amount of crit damage bonus, I believe, by a multiplicative less amount. So I just put this on for some extra damage. Note that, like, if you're, for example, not freezing enemies, you could put things on to, like, increase your freeze buildup, but also freeze is based off of how much damage you're doing. So if you're doing more damage, you're going to be freezing more often. A good way to check if your build and your weapon are doing well is if you're insta-freezing with Lunar Assault. This has massively more freeze buildup on it. You should basically always be not insta-freezing bosses, but insta-freezing everything else that comes in your path. Then for Lunar Blessing, now this is where, like, the game really changes for this build, in my opinion, and something we're going to be really focusing on making super powerful. This Lunar Blessing allows you to basically, while you're running, while you're attacking, and every second that you attack, you call down these moonbeams, which gives you, one, you get a huge buff, 58% of your damage gained as cold damage, and the moonbeams are going to be hitting. They hit for 221 attack damage. They do pure cold. They do decent radius, and these can just set off a lot of your AoE clear, killing enemies in front of you, even enemies that aren't, like, all that close to you, which is really nice. In that, we're running Magnified Area 2, Elemental Armament, and Prolonged Duration. We're actually running a weapon swap for Lunar Blessing, which I'll talk about in a second. On Pounce, because the, like, wolves are bugged, and the Predator's Mark isn't worth without them being around, we're changing the mark to apply a Freezing Mark. Freezing Mark will allow us to build up more freeze on enemies, which is huge, because, you know, a lot of our damage is based off of enemies being frozen. It's also going to give us like a 30% of our damage gained as cold damage, so we get just extra cold damage whenever we trigger this. Remember that on a boss, if you can't trigger your mark, you could just cross slash it. Cross slash it will trigger your mark for you, giving you this buff even if the enemy doesn't die. We're also running that with a little trick for, well, there's another support that I want to grab on this that's going to give us a way to keep our marks on enemies and not instantly detonate them. But right now I've got Mark for Death, which allows us to break armor on enemies, 10% of our physical damage, which, once again, like, Shred is all physical except for the projectiles, so we can break armor. Mark of Siphoning. When we put this on, if you don't detonate it with cross slash on an enemy, then you're going to be leeching your mana and life for some extra sustain. And then I've also just put on Cold Exposure. Supported skills inflict exposure for 8 seconds on critical hit with cold damage. We are 100% crit chance with our inevitable crit. So anytime that you pounce into an enemy, pounce onto a rare, pounce onto a boss, they're going to be inflicted with cold exposure. We were originally using, it's 6 a.m. Frost Orb to apply cold exposures, but you need high intelligence to apply that to high-level enemies. So we've just changed to cold exposure. Just pounce on an enemy, you apply the mark, you deal more damage, you leech, and you're going to be getting a resistant shred on them. Savage Fury, right now I've just got Prolonged Duration for more skill effect buff, which we'll also be putting in our second weapon slot. We'll explain that when we talk about our skill tree. Herald Device, Magnified Area, Frozen Spite. I'm using this as some tech to just cause even more explosions. Basically, if Herald Device causes freeze explosions, then when those enemies die on killing frozen enemies, you get to apply more frozen ice fragments, which are different than the shred ice fragments. These deal 10% of a frozen target's max life as cold damage, and fire extra projectiles. A little bit of like additional clear, elemental armament, and also elemental focus. Herald Device can itself apply freeze, so elemental focus allows it to deal more damage. Then on Arctic Howl, this is our buff that we use right when an enemy is about to get frozen. We're going to be using Tireless for our attacks to basically not count as being empowered, or not cost being empowered, so we get more attacks out of it. Icy Bite, so that when we do freeze with this, we get this buff. Usually on bosses, we're using this to proc the freeze rather than Lunar Assault. So pretty important to put Ice Bite on that. And then also Brittle Armor's got some cool tech with this. It supports skills which can hit enemies. Hits with supported skills, which freeze enemies, cause physical damage against them to break their armor while they remain frozen. So for the entire duration of an enemy being frozen, we're going to be breaking their armor for 100% of the physical damage taken while frozen. Once again, which is going to allow us to hit like harder with all of our physical skills, which we are kind of like hybrid of a bit of both. And then Cross Slash, we're mainly using to detonate marks, and also to pull in the crystals from shred onto enemies. Now, the thing with Cross Slash is I actually don't recommend always doing this in your damage rotation. We'll talk about damage rotation in a minute, but it does take a bit of time to do a Cross Slash and then shred back in. Most of the time that I've found, you're wanting to use Cross Slash when you want to quickly eliminate a like an elite or a rare, or the enemy has a relatively small hitbox and you just pull in all the fragments onto them. However, for bossing, if the boss is like a decent sized hitbox, I just don't really touch this besides detonating my mark for free if I want the extra bonus cryo damage. But on this, we're using Magnified Area, Execute, more damage on low health enemies, and Haft for more max fizz hit damage. One thing I want to note that's really important about your skills that is going to entirely depend upon what your gear looks like is if you're going to be running elemental armament or cold attunement. Cold attunement gives you 25% of your damage as extra cold damage, but you deal less fire and lightning damage. I was running this for a lot of the campaign because I just didn't happen to come across fire and lightning gear, but I'm in endgame right now, and it just so happened that my weapon has a big roll of lightning damage, and my gloves have big rolls of lightning damage. And so I actually do more damage with elemental armament versus cold attunement. Plus, you know, you're not like basically making it so you can't shock enemies. So shock is another damage multiplier. So if you're not having really any lightning or fire on your gear, you can rock cold attunement in a lot of the places that read elemental armament. If you don't, or if you just want to play it safe, you just want to pick one support, elemental armament will work a little bit better. For the gear I made it through the campaign with, plus like some stuff that kind of came right at the very end, this is the weapon that I was rocking for quite a while. I was just looking for mainly just big damage, going either if you can find increased fizz plus added fizz. Added cold is great. Added lightning is good. I don't really value added fire very much. If it's on there, it's okay. But really looking for cold and fizz damage. Lightning is fine if you get it. +4 to, or plus any amount to your melee skills is huge. Basically just a more damage increase. Sometimes rolling plus level to skills can hurt your mana. We don't really have mana issues on this build, mainly because like shred is most of our damage and it doesn't cost any mana to use. And then I just threw some runes in there for some extra fizz and cold. It's just what I had. I got lucky and got a pulsar kiln just during my campaign run. This helps for your Herald of Ice chains and doing extra damage, but it's definitely not necessary. I believe this is already a divine. I would just recommend looking for like a high fizz high cold ring with some health and some resistances. For my gloves, I picked these up towards the end, just some added damage with +1 to our melee skills. I'd rolled some extra crit damage bonus, and armor also applies to elemental damage for some extra survivability. On my helmet, just some armor, energy shield, a little bit of max life, some crit chance, and some reses. Body armor, you're looking for a high armor energy shield with some health and some resistances. Belt, same kind of thing, life and armor and some resistances. Boots, ideally as much armor or energy shield as you can get, plus movement speed. Getting some max life and some resistances there is also good. For my amulet, I had a little bit of life, some spirit, and some resistances. Nothing crazy there. And while you're leveling, you might run into some issues with needing certain amounts of dexterity or intelligence or strength. If you have the runes, you can just go ahead and socket those in to get some extra dexterity or whatever you need. You can also respec your skill tree in the small attribute nodes to fill out any sort of like additional attributes you might need. For our ascendancy points, we grab the lesser harm so that enemies, whenever they attack us, they just do less damage, which is really nice. And then we pick up forced outcome, inevitable critical hits. If you didn't know, the inevitable critical hits node basically means that every time we hit an enemy, we roll until we crit. But every time that it rolls, we deal less crit damage. And people have been graphing this out. I'll have a link to this if you want to read more. But basically, we're looking on the build to get to around like 35, 40-ish, maybe 45-ish critical hit chance, which with this node is going to give us a massive damage multiplier. This is if we didn't have inevitable critical hits. This is if we do have inevitable critical hits. You can see it's spiking up around 40% crit chance, where every time that we crit with 40%, where it's going to roll again. It's not going to roll too many times, so we're still keeping a lot of our damage. But as you can see, if you pick this node and we have like 80% critical hit chance, then most of the time it's not even going to be active, so it's not that much damage increase in the first place. So we don't need to get that much crit chance on this build, actually, but we are going to be trying to get lots of crit damage multiplier, because the more multiplier that we have, the less there is to reduce, and the more damage we'll deal with those inevitable critical hits. So that's kind of one of the reasons we went for that node. I'll have the full skill tree up on max roll. I'm currently kind of retooling some things, and some things that I was trying weren't working, so I don't want you guys to spec into those and have them not work. The main thing that I was trying to do is a weapon swap tech, so that you could use one weapon for all of your damage, and then a second weapon to apply your Arctic Cowl and all of your buffs and things like that. And I thought that would be genius, although it does seem like Lunar Blessing is bugged, as I spec'd a whole bunch of skill effect duration nodes, which it seems to not be affected by. So like this buff duration is 6.75 seconds, regardless of all of my buff duration skills, but it does seem to get affected by prolonged duration, which is weird. So it seems like the main way to scale this is actually going to be rage rather than duration. So I don't want to show you guys like the full skill tree right now, because I do need to change some things, but some tech and some stuffs that we picked up, just to mention, is Tribal Fury. This lets our strikes deal splash damage. Shred, Lunar Assault. These are strikes. So, for example, if you freeze a few enemies in front of you and then start striking them with Shred, it'll actually be able to hit multiple enemies, which really helps with some extra quality of life. I've also picked up some extra survivability nodes from Ancient Ages to get a bunch of armor and energy shield. We picked up Spirit of the Bear. This is 70% increased damage against immobilized enemies. Well, technically 90% here, which is huge. And then I actually picked up Molten Claw to gain 8% of our damage as extra fire damage while shapeshifted. We also have Electrified Claw, so we get damage of lightning damage while we're shapeshifted. I'm currently speccing over to Dimensional Weak Spots, so we can treat monsters' resistances as inverted. But what we're going to do with that is now we freeze, shock, and ignite, just kind of passively. And I'm actually going to go and end up picking the Sigil of Lightning for 30% increased damage with hits against shocked enemies and Sigil of Fire for increased damage with hits against ignited enemies should be quite a big damage increase. We're also about to start speccing into some crit nodes once I get like some actual good crit stuff on our weapon, but that is kind of where the skill tree is progressing. If you want to see like a zoomed out version of it, that's what it's looking like right now. But once again, I do need to change some things. The fact that skill effect duration isn't affecting Lunar Blessing means I'll probably do a weapon set 2 thing, and I'm imagining we're just going to put the wolf packs on the second weapon set so that we can kind of snapshot the wolf pack with as much damage buffs and survivability as we can. That's currently what I'm going to be retooling to. I just got to get some more currency to do that. So for your combat rotation, there's some important things that you want to do so that when a boss is frozen, you have all of your damage up. We're a very much burst focused build, and we need to have the most burst in our damage window when a boss is frozen. So there's a few things to kind of guarantee that. The first is when you start a fight, you want to make sure that you're pouncing on bosses. This is going to apply our mark. They'll get more freeze buildup. We'll be able to leech off of them. We're going to be breaking their armor. And so pounce is the way to start fights. While the fight is happening, there's 2 things you want to keep an eye out for. The first is your rage meter. You're going to want to build up rage before popping Lunar Blessing, because Lunar Blessing is a huge damage increase for us. So I'll usually pounce on an enemy. I'll cross slash them so that we're getting our bonus freeze damage. I'll shred Lunar Assault. Lunar Assault is really big. It's kind of our spam attack until the boss is frozen. Throw on another pounce, just kind of comboing those skills together so we can like reapply the mark after we've gotten it. And then once we're ready to go crazy, Lunar Assault, Savage Fury, and Arctic Howl. I like to pop Lunar Assault and Savage Fury before we Arctic Howl, because as soon as we Arctic Howl, the enemy will be frozen. And then once the enemy is frozen, just spam your shred. If it's a big boss, like it's a large hitbox, you don't need to use cross slash. If it is a small or like humanoid enemy, I'll usually cross slash into them to detonate the shards. And that is kind of the setup. If the boss doesn't die on your initial burst, I will then shred them until I get back to Savage Fury, pop Savage Fury, Lunar Assault them until we've got Rage to go pop our Lunar Blessing, and then shred them once they're frozen. It is definitely a very involved build. This might sound a little bit more complicated than it actually is, but basically you're just Lunar Assaulting enemies till they're frozen, shredding them when they are frozen, and making sure that our multiple buffs are up so that when we have our burst window, they are going to die. Guys, that's going to do it for the video. I apologize if I said some stupid things and was a little bit incoherent. I've been currently awake for over 24 hours, so I just want to get this video out for y'all before we like get too crazy in the maps. And if you guys have any questions, want to learn more, or just want to hang out and chat some Druid, I will be live on Twitch and YouTube for the next probably week, just blasting this game. So yeah, I'll catch you on the next one. Take care. Peace.